I had a small sort of semi-pro combo of my own called the Blackjacks, which played in my mother's club and a few sort of smaller venues around town, you know. Similar to the Beatles before they actually went to Germany, you know. And of course I bumped into the guys when they opened my mother's club, the Casbah, when they were known as the Quarrymen, and they were just a strict guitar lineup.
They didn't have any drummer at all?
No, not at that time, no. It was John, George and Paul, and there was another guy called Ken Brown, who sat in with them on the Saturday nights.
Really?
There was no drummer. Just small amps, not the best of equipment, you know. A couple of guitars. I think there was a Hofner, Futurama, and whatever Paul's guitar was. I can't remember. It wasn't all that good, you know. But just strictly a guitar.
What kind of stuff were they doing?
Still doing the material which came out later. Carl Perkins, Buddy Holly, Elvis Presley, and Little Richard, Everly Brothers. The thing about it was, even though they didn't have a drummer, the variety of material was a lot different, okay, because we had other groups who played there who had drummers, you know, sort of Rory Storm and the Hurricanes, and Derry and the Seniors, who were sort of the top groups at that time. But they were sort of a different kind of band to the Quarrymen, you know, the material they played. And I think the Quarrymen compensated for the fact that, okay, they just weren't like a frontline singer or a one-man act. They showed that they could harmonise, you know, different material, country and western, coaster stuff, you name it. They busted it out, you know.
Did they? Could you sense anything at that point? Could you?
They went down well, you know.
Did
It was always they always appreciated listening to them, even though they didn't have a drummer. You know, they compensated for the fact on that, you know, the harmonies, you know, and the vocal aspect. But when I actually joined them, it was funny when we were a fivesome, when Stu Sutcliffe was with us. And then when Stu left and then tragically died afterwards, we were a foursome. There was always an inner belief in ourselves. It sounds funny now, it sounds a bit blasé, but we felt that somewhere along the line we were going to make it big, okay. But don't get me wrong, I don't think even they themselves sort of visualised that they were going to become the phenomenon they turned out to be. But they were concerned in as much as that, okay, they knew they were going to get somehow or other a record into the English charts. And become rock and roll stars in England, possibly Europe or something like this. But I think that was the goal that we were aiming at that time.
So your band was playing the same type of material then?
Yeah, most bands
American R&B kind of stuff.
Yeah. The groups in England at that time were very, very much influenced by American stuff. You know, being quite honest about it, the material was the English people, or rock stars, if you want to call it, at that time were putting out. Yuck, you know, that's the only word for it. So it was a case of like anything which came over from the other side of the Atlantic, you know, everyone was on the bandwagon. That was the stuff that everyone was playing.
So were you listening to like American rhythm sections and American drummers, that type of thing?
Yeah.
Your style?
Yeah, I think everyone did. You know, I always remember a story when I was still at school. I remember Dwayne Eddy, you know, and the guitar sound which came out, which was something like, you know, dynamite, and everyone sort of suddenly went around to the record shop and said, God almighty, man, listen to this, you know. You know, virtually overnight to 500 Dwayne Eddy sounds in Liverpool, you know, trying to capitalise on it. But it was, you know, there was very much influenced by, you know, simply because of the fact that we knew, you know, that's where the rock and roll was coming from. You know, they were the guys who were knocking it out, and everyone was just copying.
Did you know at that point that you wanted to be a drummer in a band, or was it just more of a hobby? Or
at that present moment in time, it was more like a fun occupation. Okay, I had sort of ideas about going and becoming a teacher or something like this. You know, because of being at high school and had educational qualifications. But when I got the actual offer to join the Beatles, you know, and go to Hamburg, and by this time my group had split up. I knew I could never go professional with it because they were going back to college and you know, different work aspects and this type of stuff. So the offer came, and I said, yeah, I'll think about it, and discussed it with my parents. And they said, listen, Pete, you know, it's what you want to do. It's your life. You know, we're not going to turn and say you must do this, you mustn't do that. And they said, yeah, you want to do it, do it. And I went down and auditioned with the guys. And 2 days later I was in Hamburg.
Really?
It was there.
It's 2 days rehearsal and you were gone.
Wasn't even rehearsal. We had did an audition which lasted about 5 minutes. Okay, about 6 numbers. Ramrod, which is like a 12-bar instrumental. Johnny Kid Shaking All Over, Long Tall Sally, Memphis, and I think it was a Beverly Brothers number, something like this. And they banged them out. I sat in and said, "Oh yeah, got the gist on that." They turned around and said, "Yeah, that's great." We played one. Following night we played at the Jacaranda, which was Alan Williams's coffee club. We played downstairs in what they call the pit, which is like a black 12-foot dungeon. Okay. We had mics sort of strapped to broom handles and that as well, it was as close as that. And following day, it was a case of we loaded all our stuff in a van, so we were driving over there, no such thing as flying. And Alan Williams and a couple of other people, and the rest of the guys all loaded our stuff in, and off we set.
What kind of a kit were you using?
At that time I had a Premier kit.
Really?
Yeah. Which was just nothing by, today's standards, it was just a standard kit, bass drum, top tom, snare, side tom.
Small bass?
24.
24, so that was...
Yeah, it was normally a 22 or 24. There weren't many 24s knocking around at that time, but it just so happened this particular kit that I got was a 24.
So was that period the formative period for the band in terms of creating their sound?
Yeah, lot to do with the fact because you've got to put yourself in the position. When we went over to Germany, we played 7 hours a night, 7 nights a week. Okay, with 15-minute breaks in between sets. That's all that we had. Okay, we didn't have to go out and slug it out right from the word go. We could take it easy on a couple of sets.
Right.
But a lot of it was hard slog. But the fact that we played that long together, I think we formulated the type of music which later sort of took over. We got ourselves together a sound, an act, the harmonics of the group sort of gelled together,
Right.
And where before there'd been a couple of rough edges, everything sort of rounded itself out.
Right.
And I suppose in a way, if you look at it, the 7 hours a night, 7 days a week was like constant rehearsal,
Right.
Until we sort of got things going.
Right.
But once the edges were smoothed off and the adrenaline was flowing, no one could catch us.
No, definitely not. Did you sing at all?
Not at that time.
No.
I sort of, when we came back to Liverpool, sort of started doing a couple of numbers, Matchbox.
You sang that?
Yeah. And when the Twist came out, Peppermint Twist and this type of stuff. I didn't really sort of feel I was a vocalist, I was there to be a drummer, They were the guys who were doing the vocals.
Right.
Okay, now and again I'd sort of break it up into the odd song as and when wanted.
What was it like playing with Paul? I mean, as half the rhythm section with him. I mean, was he that good then?
He was always talented.
Was
okay, because the other two guys were talented as well. Don't get me wrong. But Paul was one of these guys. He could play piano, play a little bit of trumpet.
Really?
He had a hell of a vocal range even at that time.
Did he?
He flew sort of range from Little Richard's, out now rock numbers, Long Tall Sally to, soft song ballads like Somewhere Over the Rainbow. So that was, a repertoire which went from there to there, so to speak.
So to my mind, Paul always remained as a leader of the band for me. To me, Paul was the Beatles. I don't know, you were certainly closer than I was, but that's what I felt because of that, because he just seemed to be so far, he seemed to be so professional at such an early age.
Yeah, they always, I never sort of pinpoint him as being the leader, okay. He was always the one who wanted to be the, how can I put it, public relations man, the one who wanted to sort of let people know what was going on. He was the diplomatic guy in the group.
Right.
He was the one who sort of talked to fans as and when they wanted him, made sure that people, when we were away, he sort of kept in touch back home and said, oh yeah, we're doing this, that and the other, things are going great for us. But the funny thing was, Steve, at that time, there was no, as you can put it, dominant figure. Okay, it was, a group outfit. and each one sort of had their own particular character within the group itself. It may have been later on. For myself, I tend to think my own personal opinion is that John was the dominant figure. Okay,
Really?
but you know, people have their own taste and opinions. You know, it goes on this particular point of view. Other people, as you turn around and say, think Paul was the dominant figure. You can't take it away from the guy that, you know, his talent was there, and you know, he's shown it now, because once the Beatles finished, you know, Wings, and now the fact that he's knocking out this material, he's one of these guys I call, he's got the Midas touch. You know, no matter what he does, he's talented and he's gifted. You can't take that away from him.
How much writing was done while you were with the band, and original stuff? Was there much?
Yeah, we never, when I first joined them, we had no sort of ideas about introducing original material in right from the word go. Now John and Paul, even in the Skittle Group days, had sort of sit down and written, how can you call it, you know, semi-style Buddy Holly numbers, Elvis Presley lyrics, this type of stuff. You know, they listened to American stuff, been influenced by it, and penned stuff, and then sort of said, okay, forget about it.
Right.
So, as it so happened, when we took off in Liverpool and the rest of the bands followed us, we had a couple of aces up our sleeves, and as much as all of a sudden, you know, when the bands were starting to play the material which we were playing, we turned around and started to introduce original material into the act, which was like none of the others could do it at that time. But like everything else, the minute we started introducing original material, and overnight every other band suddenly became songwriters, you know. But the stuff which we did initially was stuff which they'd penned, okay, and sort of had in the pipeline, so to speak. And they just sort of came up one day and said, okay, we'll get together on this original number, you know. And we'd all sort of practice at the cabin after a dinner time session, and sort of throw it together, you know, spend about half an hour on it or something like this, and then we'd say, try it out on the kids tonight, and see what the reaction was. Well, 9 times out of 10 it used to go down, you know.
Did it?
But, you know, the fact that it went down, it was kept in the repertoire, polished up, and a lot of the material which was played was sort of stuff which, you know, okay, I'm not saying that a lot of it at that time, but some of it which was played then went on to the early albums.
They did.
Yeah, and okay, as they sort of became more and more into the show business world, you know, more and more focal featured, you know, the Lennon and McCartney songwriting team was there, and they were bashing them out, no one's business.
Right. So then you must have had some influence on the sound, the rhythm style on those early records.
Oh yeah.
I mean, because you had originally played it with them, they probably said when the other drummers came in, this is what we heard, and this is the type of thing you might try. So
yeah, just on the early stuff, and stuff which OK had played on, and then OK was, let's say for example, Twist and Shout or something like this, and Untold Sally. Just two sort of good examples, numbers which came out on albums. Not a great deal of difference, you know, in the type of drumming which, okay, as far as the rhythm section was concerned, and the beat that I would have laid down, it was, there wasn't quite the same sound which I'd envisaged, you know, when I was with them. But you could tell that, you know, somewhere along the line someone had turned around and said, okay, well this is how we used to do it.
Right.
Now, you know, get it as close to that as possible.
Right.
That's the way they worked.
Can you look back at the Beatles' music as a whole and see how you might have done it different, or is that too hard to do, or how you might have done it like that, or?
I think the only possible answer to that is on their early albums, because that's a lot of the material which I like from them. Okay, it tends to be like a, I don't know, like a rock blues, you know, type of material. American rock, you know, English arrangement, so to speak. Yeah, a couple of things, you know, possible drum riffs, or you know, paraphrasing or something like this. But it's hard to say. You know, you listen to the finished version, and you don't know what's actually gone on prior to that.
Right.
You know, so unless you've actually sort of been in the session and heard what it sounded like at the beginning. You know, when you listen to a finished product, it's easy to criticise and sort of turn around and say, oh, well, you should have done this and you should have done the other. there may have been some reason for it. You know.
Right.
It mightn't have been them, it may have been the A&R man.
Right.
Could have been the sound techniques, you know.
Right.
Who knows?
Right. How important was George Martin in the sound of the Beatles?
I think very important, actually. Give him a lot of credit. I think one thing has got to be understood. He had 4 guys there, a lot of latent talent, okay. And I think initially he didn't know how to handle it, right, because he was how can I put it, semi-jazz come, Peter Sellers type A&R man, as regards sort of a hard rock band. He had ideas, but I don't think he'd ever sort of recorded with the talents the Beatles had. And I think, the actual sound he wanted from them, he himself didn't know at the time. He had an idea about what it should sound like, but he didn't know the depths and the reverbs which could happen from it.
Right.
But I think there's been a good blend between the two of them, and plus the fact he was clever enough to introduce into certain songs, different arrangements which took it out of the standard sort of, 8 bars, middle 4, 8 bars, solo, paraphrasing, out, this type of stuff. He switched beginnings, took the middle 4, put it somewhere else, so that there's, where people are expecting something, it was rather different.
Right.
And I think they owe a lot to him, because he was a musician in his own right. He had some good ideas, but I think that also, on top of that, he had guys who, if they turned around and said, if he turned around and said, okay, well, we try it this way, they'd turn around and say, hey, that's a load of rubbish, that. Know what you're playing at, this is what it should sound like. So there was a good blend.
Right. Was George Martin the one who said to you, I don't think you're strong enough for the band? Is that basically what happened, which he also said to Ringo?
No, the funny thing was, Steve, he didn't mention anything actually to myself. What had happened was he'd turned round and he'd talked to Brian and said, okay, going to record the boys, not quite happy with the sound we're getting with Pete on drums, but what I'd like to do is get a session drummer in for the first couple of records, so we find exactly what's going on, but there's no need to sort of break the group up, because what happens in the recording studio has nothing to do with what happens on stage. People don't know about that. So consequently, he was fully expecting, at that moment in time I'd sort of been there, and we were due to go back about 3 or 4 weeks later to, put the finishing touches to it, and he was fully expecting me back, but in the meantime, I'd been kicked out. So we had Andy White, who was the session drummer, standing by, and of course when Ringo landed up, he said, where's Pete? And the boys turned around and said, Pete's left the group. So he was rather surprised about that. So we turned around and said, okay, well, it's going to be Love Me Do, the first release, so let's listen to what Ringo's got to play on it, okay? And he listened to Ringo, and he said, okay, off, Andy, step in, okay? And P.S. I Love You on the other side was very, similar process on that. Right. Ringo played, said, Andy, step in, okay? And to this day, even if he himself turns around and says there's a lot of confusion about which actual version of Love Me Do it is, whether in fact it's Andy White's version, it's Ringo's version, or it's my version.
Really?
By the time they'd overdubbed and taken the bass tracks and all that.
Right.
So, on that particular basis, I think he's sort of been misquoted in a sense. Okay, I'm not happy with Pete's drumming.
Right.
And that's sort of been the excuse which has been used, but he didn't mean it in that sort of concept.
Right.
If you with me, Steve?
I understand. So, certainly you must have confronted Brian and George and said, I can play this stuff, I can do it. Would they listen, or they already had their minds made up, or? No.
When the axe came, I had no warning at all about it. Even Brian hadn't sort of come up and said, hey Pete, we're going to use a session man at the next session. That wouldn't have made any difference to me, most probably. And I most probably wanted to know why. And watch the session man and see, what he was doing and see where I was going wrong. But there was nothing mentioned, Steve. That was the funny thing about it. It was a case of being called into the office. And Brian turned around after about 3 or 4 minutes and said, "Look, Pete, I've got bad news for you. You know, boys want you out, they want Ringo in." And you can imagine I was shell-shocked, you know, because not having any forewarning at all about it, or any hint. Sort of riding on the crest of the wave, yeah, we're going to have a record on in a couple of weeks, you know. I just couldn't get words out, you know. The only reason I could sort of say, you know, was, you know, what is it, you know, what's the reason for it? And he turned around and gave the excuse, you know, they feel that Ringo is a better drummer than you, which didn't hold water at that time, anyway. But again, you're struggling in your own mind, you know, sort of saying, I'm going to wake up in a minute, you know, it's a bad nightmare. But, you know, I turned around and said, well, Ringo being asked, you know, what does he have to say about it? We're struggling for things to say. And he said, yeah, you know, it's all arranged. Ringo's going to join the band on Saturday night. So it was cut and dried. Ringo had been approached, agreed to step into the band, and I was out.
I know you've gone through this a million times, but you have to be a little unforgiving of the band not approaching it themselves.
Yeah, it's something which for quite some time after Steve, that was, you know, a little bit uptight about it. Because okay, but it must probably been handled a bit more diplomatically, and I'd have been given a bit, you know, a reason to defend myself. There wouldn't have been this, I don't know, just well, not animosity, but this, you know, ill feeling which is sort of drawn in around this particular incident. You know, people sort of turn around and say, oh, you know, must have been bad and all this type of stuff. It may have been settled sort of, you know, very politely, something like this, and they said, okay. But it was the fact that, you know, they never had the decency after me being with them for 2 years, doing all that for them, to actually be there and sort of turn around and say, look, Pete, you know, it's got to happen this way or the other. They just left it up to Brian to be the fall guy, and boom, that was it, you know.